Thank you, everyone. Ms. City Clerk, this is Lupita Sanchez Cornejo, and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee for the LAUSD Board of Education Compensation Review Committee. We have all three members of the Ad Hoc Committee present, Ms. Danielle Forbes, Mr. Mark Henderson, and myself. Can you read our first agenda item, please?
Item number 1 is discussion relative to proposed salaries and benefits of the LAUSD Board of Education members for possible presentation to the full committee.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment cards?
No public comment cards.
And so we did get some documentation that we had asked for at the last meeting that we wanted to go ahead and have discussion. Mr. Henderson, do you have some questions? Or?
One of the questions, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions I had, as I look at, try to reduce the paper, so I'm looking at my, I'm looking at that one. But then I realized my eyes are bad. One of the questions we had in regards to actually the calculation per student, was it taken into consideration, and my other chair mentioned this earlier, was it taken into consideration all the adult schools and the charter schools, all the students in total that comes up to the calculation per student per salary? And if it does not, we should include that in there to make sure we can come up to some better accurate calculation in regards to per warm body in a chair per se versus just K through 12. We should have K through 12, adult education, and charter.
Unless there's some reason that those two categories were eliminated. You know, we'd like to know that. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane, please.
Hi, I'm Jeff Crane. So the answer was, and I sent a second sheet that had what we call fingertip facts, which had those greater numbers. There's no reason in particular. When I created the document, I didn't count the adult school, the charter schools, the preschool, the early ed programs. It's just one of the accounting things that we do in the school district. We have K-12 and then these other programs. In some cases, the other programs required a different type of attention from the board. They're independent. They're also, for the most part, some of them are independently funded. The early ed program comes with different sets of funding. The charter schools, we get a charter maintenance fee. I think it's approximately 116,000 students, so they're not part of that 550,000. And then the adult school numbers have been significantly changed, but they're not also full-time students in the same way. Many of the adult students are taking one class, one night a week, rather than, a full academic load of 5 or 6 classes. And so we just use it as an accounting mechanism, and I thought the 54,000 or whatever the number was significant enough to say, if I just add in the other things, it might make it much more complicated. Those are the students where we receive full ADA 4.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that receive full?
ADA, the average daily attendance rate that the district receives from the state.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cranfield. I think the report was actually very detailed. I just wanted to include the total responsibility of the board member, but I get it for the ease of calculation. I understand that. I just wanted to.
I don't have that fingertip facts in front of me, but if you could mention that number right now, that might help me in the future.
Well,
where it says the total enrollment.
Including the adult education and the independent charter schools, it goes up to 734,641.
That sounds about right. So.
And so my follow-up question would be, though, if there were and I'm not sure if you would know this, but if there was an increase in the salaries to the board members, a potential cut to the budget could happen to those categories, to the adult education or
yes,
I mean, charter school.
Yeah, so there could be, we do a budget 3 years out, and so we only know this year's budget with any certainty, the money that's actually going to be put forward. And at this second, we don't even know that. But predicting forward is always done based on the current. And so we can't even anticipate any potential cuts because really what we know is this year. We're pretty sure about next year because it's difficult for cuts to be made on a permanent basis 1 year out, but potentially 2 years out if there's a significant change in state funding, it could mean a change in the district funding. It doesn't vary much in the end. It's, I would say that any anticipated change is 3 years from now is less than 10%.
I have a question as well. Are you, in looking at the proposed budget allocations for a couple of, or for Member Gomez, there's a total board member discretionary funds column. Is that number the same for each board member?
Yes, brand new board members get an extra $5,000 to establish their office, buy a new letterhead, have the phones moved, those sorts of things. And then the board president's office is allocated an additional $50,000, though they don't always, sometimes they've declined that amount. So within that, it's pretty close. I think the number there might be $285,000
Right, as ongoing funds?
each year. Annually, they receive that.
Correct. It's 285 plus the 5,000 ongoing.
Right.
And then 4,900 for
Telephones.
telephone expense and support. And what else do they use these discretionary funds for other than telephone and
So they use it for
letterhead and
all their operations. They get lots of requests to provide school buses for field trips or admissions. They sometimes can send students to conferences, so they'll use it for that. It's really their office budget, and so it can be used for any school district purpose, which sometimes can include, school calls up and says, we can't make it through the next week without any paper. And a board member may say, I'll transfer funds into your account for paper.
Is the amount, this 285, is that mandated or by law, or is it?
Absolutely set by the district, and when the budget is approved by the board members, it includes that account.
So that's a budgetary consideration as well. That could potentially be hit if we were to increase salaries.
Potentially, yes. I think that, the district and the board decides on the allocation of the $13 billion.
Right.
And they've maintained that number for quite a few years. So we don't anticipate them changing it. The only increases that I know in the last maybe 10 or 12 years have been there recently were some to match salary increases that were given to all employees. And so that amount used to be $264, I think, in the last time, and it was increased to approximately $20,000 to cover salary increases since 2008 or so.
So, wait, if I understand you correctly, the ongoing funds were increased
Yes, I think they were.
because there was an increase to the funds? The increase in the salary.
So a board member that has 5 staff people, in 2008, found that the $264,000 no longer covered quite as much as it did because they had salary increases that were given to all employees. Their staff had them too. And so they augmented that account at some point to really cover that. Otherwise, they would be reducing a position just to cover the people that were there because of salary increases that occurred for everybody in the district.
Thank you.
I want you to, can you clarify, so board members do not pay their staff from the discretionary funds?
They do. That $284,000 is used to cover not all. So they are 2 people in their office come from what was originally an umbrella account. There used to be like a secretarial pool, and then they had a single staff person that was covered before they had this individual board discretionary account. They created that probably in 1992 or 3, and historically, I think it was originally $150,000. At some point, it was increased to $254,000. And then some other accounts were collapsed into it. It became $264,000. And then in the last couple of years, it was increased at about $20,000, I think. And it was because they were reaching this point where automatic staff increases exceeded the amount that was there. So 2 people are funded differently, and then they have the discretion to hire other people. Some use that discretionary account to hire staff, and some don't. All right now have additional staff, some of them coming out of that account.
You mentioned that the board gets $50,000 a year.
The board president.
Board president. Oh, board president. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's to cover the additional responsibilities of that office. It really was thought to cover maybe if they need to hire an extra staff person because they have extra responsibilities, either in traveling or in public activities. They're representing the entire board, and so they might need an additional person to help schedule or to get them there, or it's at their discretion how they use the funds.
So, for example, if they attend a conference, it would come from this
Yes.
discretionary funds.
Yes.
You know, okay.
All their travel essentially comes from those funds. And they're members in a statewide organization, 2 national organizations, and one board member is on the board of directors of each of those organizations, the California School Board Association, the National School Board Association, the Council of Great City Schools. And so there's quarterly or monthly meetings. All the board members are, because of our size, are delegates to the California School Board Association, so they all might travel to that conference. And all the travel funds come from this account.
One other question, Mr.
Sure.
Crane, Madam Chair as well. So in regards to the budgeting for the discretionary fund or the funding, the board member themselves aren't responsible for calculating the CPI and everything. That's actually done by the district, so
So there actually is no calculation for,
it's just a
there's
flat.
not indexed
It's just
at
flat.
all, yeah. And that's why the increase recently, the $20,000, it didn't grow all by itself, though other district accounts do, and so this was trying to even that out a little bit. Other district accounts, salary accounts for teachers, for office people, if there's a raise given in a salary account, it's automatically budgeted. And that's what's taken into account when the district is negotiating with the bargaining unit and there's a 2% increase. None of the offices have to consider that 2% increase. It's automatically added to the salary accounts. And so it's covered. This discretionary account is different. It's not considered a salary account because they don't just have to use salary for this, or use it for salary. I would only venture to guess that in most offices, $150,000 would be the tops for salary, and $100,000 is used for school needs of various types. There's a lot of requests for things, especially the favorite thing is buses, but we have other requests that board members hear and they want to provide for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ford? Thank you, Mr. Crane.
I'll look forward to coming back and answering anything.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You've been very helpful.
Did you have any other questions as the materials that we received as we look at?
No, I didn't. I had my questions answered.
Mr. Henderson?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Do we have any comments now for public comment, any cards? Because at this point, we've discussed our items, and
Good, then you can adjourn if you want.
then I'd like to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. City Attorney. Oh, actually, we did have one question.
Sure, and I think just to frame, Harith Trivedi from the City Attorney's Office, pardon me, just to frame your discussion going forward. I understand the ad hoc committee here is meeting to begin considering proposals to propose to the full committee.
Yes.
Yep.
And there's a meeting later on this evening, of course, of the full committee to receive additional information. It is a reminder of what the ultimate act that the full committee has to take is to adopt a resolution that sets the salary and benefits for LAUSD board members. The ad hoc committee here can propose different options to the full committee or debate that in full committee as well and present that. You had asked a question last time about whether the committee could impose a full-time service requirement on the board, and I'd like to address that briefly. The state constitution here provides limited authority to the city in the charter and through the charter to the committee to set compensation for LAUSD board members. And that, what it doesn't do, what the state constitution doesn't allow is for the committee or the city to set general duties or responsibilities disconnected from compensation. So we have advised and advise you that compensation, a higher level of compensation than that is existing in the state code can be enacted by the committee and conditioned upon the board member devoting their full time to the office, and that's what the current scheme is. What the committee could not do is impose a condition of full-time service to receive any compensation at all. The state code level has to remain as an option for those who choose to maintain some other outside occupation or earned income. Because we don't have the authority as a city to set general duties and responsibilities, and imposing a full-time service requirement to obtain any compensation would be tantamount to setting a general duty or responsibility. So the state code provides $24,000 adjusted, I think, as a baseline. That option exists in the current scheme and should exist in the scheme adopted by the committee, but you can have a higher level of salary like that exists now, conditioned upon full-time service. So I wanted to just make that clear to this committee.
So at the most extreme, we could propose if a board member was going to work part-time, that they receive the baseline of $24,000, and if they were going to be employed or participate full-time as a board member, then they could reap whatever our maximum is, or whatever.
That is within the discretion of this committee to set that,
I mean, I'm
that
just saying
level.
the extreme.
And that's, yes, and that's the scheme I think that exists right now that was adopted by the 2012 and 2007 committees, is that if you devote your full time to services, you get the higher amount, which right now is roughly set at $48,000.
$48,000, exactly.
But if you have another commitment outside, you then take the state code level, which is set in the state code. And so that maintains.
Okay. Mr. Henderson, any question? Oh.
Yes, I do actually have a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the, I think one of the past board members stated something about the trying to find the correct word for it, but how the stipulations extended to their spouse in regards to the work and or services they could provide just in general. But if, for instance, if I work at a Ford dealer and the district buys Fords, I can no longer work at the Ford dealer. Is there anything, do we have any jurisdiction over that or any weigh in on that?
No, this committee does not have jurisdiction to change those rules because those are state law conflict of interest rules. There's a government code, section 1090, and then the Political Reform Act that very specifically regulate any public official in the state with regard to their conflicts of interests. And when that extends to business interests of their spouse and when it doesn't is all governed by a state scheme, which is outside the parameters of us to deal with here.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? So I have two questions for you. So I know that this committee can increase what the highest, if you're working full-time, what the high amount is. Can we increase the amount of the $24,000 to higher? Let's say if you are a part-time board member, can we say we're going to increase that as well?
Yes, you could. You could set higher thresholds in the state law based on any conditions you want to attach or not attach. You could set a higher threshold, for example, unconnected to full-time service, which is what I think you're asking.
Yes.
As long as the state code default exists.
Okay.
And it would be obviated in this, but yeah.
Okay.
That's within your control. You can, the difficulty is setting that I want to frame here is setting a compensation that's linked to some full-time service, and if you don't have that full-time service, you get zero compensation. That is problematic.
Sure,
to understand.
and we understand, yeah.
That's-
And then my second question is, does this committee have the authority to, for example, say the increases will impact the board that's there 2017, and you get an increase up to a certain amount, and then in 2 years, you get another bump, and then in, year 3, you get another bump?
That is within the discretion of the committee. The committee convenes every 5
We can
years.
do a step or a
So you
tier.
could have a graduated increase. It's completely a policy call, and within the discretion of the committee to set it up that way.
Okay. Well,
I got no more questions.
no more questions? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you
Yeah,
being here for this and look forward to the next.
thank you.
Ms. City Clerk, I'd like to go ahead and adjourn now that we have had our discussion, and thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.